Hey, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Maggie's and the People's Postcode Lottery, my name's Stephen Jardine. Welcome to this special coronavirus live panel discussion event. Really happy to have so many of you with us this afternoon. You might know me from BBC Radio Scotland and BBC Scotland Debate Night, a programme that we're doing virtually at the moment using technology like this. Most weeks it doesn't work, so I hope I'm not going to be a curse for things this afternoon, but I'm really happy to be with you to share some stories from you this afternoon and to explore some of the challenges of living with cancer during the time of coronavirus. We've got two great guests this afternoon for the discussion, and then in about 40 minutes time I'll open it up to questions for you. So there is a questions tab which you should be able to see on the right hand side of your screen. If you're struggling to see it, it's at the top of the little question mark, and you can just click on that and send us your questions at any time really over the course of the next hour, but especially we'll try and get around to them specifically from about 2:40 onwards. So that would be the time when we'd really kind of dig into the points that you're trying to raise then. So let me introduce you to fellow panelists here this afternoon. With us, we have Andrew Anderson, who is the Maggie's Edinburgh Centre Head. Afternoon, Andrew. Everything working at your end?
Yeah, we're all live and ready to go. Thanks so much, Stephen.
Excellent. And you're live at Maggie's for us this afternoon. How is it there this afternoon?
Yeah, I'm sitting in our new extension that we built last year, which is a phenomenal space for us to be able to use. Sadly, we're in a situation where the centre isn't being used as we would standardly normally have it used. Outside the door at the moment, there are about 40 NHS staff who are taking a break from the hospital to have their lunch, and they're really appreciating the space. And we're in the process of starting to reopen the centre for supports here at Maggie's Edinburgh.
Right, talking about lunch, also with us for this discussion, we have Lesley Stephen, who joins us from her home. She is a Maggie's visitor centre user. What a great kitchen, Lesley. It looks like you're about to present a cooking show from there this afternoon.
Well, as you know, we've just had 3 teenage boys coming in, making their own lunch. So I hope they don't reappear. But yeah, thank you for that.
I can't believe how clean and tidy they are. The same thing has just happened next door in my kitchen, and it doesn't look anything as you've taught them well.
I've trained them well. My work is done.
So Andrew, let me start with you this afternoon. What are the issues that you've been facing, that you've been living with at Maggie's, and that you hear from the people using the service right now?
So I guess, first of all, just to talk about what we had to do as a team in Maggie's Edinburgh, but also Maggie's across the whole of the UK. As it became apparent that it was increasingly unsafe to provide the service as we would standardly do, we've had to shift the nature and way we provide support at Maggie's. So over a very, very short space of time, over about 4 days, we shifted our standard face-to-face approach within the centre to an online, telephone, email support programme. And I've first of all been absolutely blown away by how flexibly people have responded to that as people looking for support, but also what an amazing team of professionals that I work alongside who have adapted very, very quickly to a very new way of working. And we adapted so quickly because people were so frightened. The language that was coming out at the time of the start of the pandemic and throughout has been very frightening for the global population, but extremely frightening for a population who are in a compromised situation anyway, a population for whom they hear questions about risk in terms of their immune system, risk associated with their treatment, knowing that they're compromised in a range of physical and sometimes emotional ways. And then these extra demands that came on in a very rapid way were making people ask us extra challenging questions about the complexity of their own circumstances and their family circumstances. So I'm delighted that Maggie's has been able to respond as we have. We've been as busy as we standardly would be, but just in a very different way, not with the beauty of the space around us, but still with the real human contact on the phone or online or by email. And our anticipation is to be able to continue that as long as people need it.
Had you planned for this kind of scenario, Andrew, in terms of the technology we're using this afternoon and equipping staff at home to be able to carry on the service? Had you gone through scenario planning to try and work out how you would cope in a situation like this?
The honest answer to that is no. We had absolutely no kind of pre-planning for it. As an organisation, we'd had familiarity with Teams, and we'd started to use that much more effectively to minimise travel costs and some of the issues to do with that as a charitable organisation. Some of our centres had embarked on it, particularly centres like Maggie's Highlands, for whom their population is geographically remote and they've used much more online services over a longer time. But certainly for us in Edinburgh, this was a really accelerated shift. We've tried over the years to think about putting things in place, but probably have had a nervousness about it because we're so familiar with a face-to-face format. But we were obliged to make this shift, and actually that obligation has made us very nimble and has really helped us create a platform that, without question, we will continue with, as well as continuing to have face-to-face support in the centres.
Yeah, what are the positives that have so far come out of this for you and Maggie's?
I think some of the positives probably are things that we wouldn't have immediately expected. So one of the positives is, as much as it's been really tough for us as a team, it's really galvanised us as a team even more than I would have expected. I work with extraordinary healthcare professionals in Maggie's Edinburgh, but also a team of extraordinary professionals across the UK. And we've had to work really tightly, really closely, communicate as effectively as we possibly can. And that's a real outcome that I'm delighted about. And to be able to stay galvanised at a time where we've all been personally stretched and professionally stretched has been brilliant. But I think some of the really positive things have been the fact that we are now able to flexibly provide support for somebody for whom a 2-hour journey from the borders to come to us for support isn't necessary now. They can sit in their bedroom, in their bed, not have to get out and still get the quality of support that they would have got within the centre. A population of people for whom they're concerned about their immunocompromised state can access the same quality of support remotely. The keenness from people is to want to come back to the centre for face-to-face support, but they're only keen to do it when it feels safe to do so. So I think one of our deep learnings is that we'll be able to flexibly work around people's needs more effectively than we have done in the past.
And you've been supporting the NHS as well. I mean, you mentioned you've got doctors and nurses in for lunch just next door today, but it's kind of strengthened the relationship with the medical teams at the Western just across the road from you as well.
It really has. So we're 23 years old as an organisation in Maggie's Edinburgh, and we've had really strong working relationships with our NHS colleagues, and that has grown across the whole of the UK and now with our international centres as well. But what's been really interesting for us is a large percentage of the population of healthcare professionals who've come to the centre for a respite resource have said, look, I've signposted people to the centre and I knew it was a wonderful space, but I had no idea what an extraordinary space it was. And I had no idea that you ran all of these types of programmes and courses and workshops, so that they now have a really deepened, galvanised understanding of how we can best support the population of people that they're supporting in hospitals. So that strength of relationship feels really important. And they've been very grateful to Maggie's for being so generous to offer the space and to offer the emotional support that we've been providing, which I'm proud to be able to do, and I'm keen for us to be able to do in an ongoing way as we start to come out of the complexity of lockdown.
Just on that, Andrew, we are starting slowly the journey out, cautiously, tentatively, the journey out of lockdown. Almost a week since we started to move. How is that changing the conversation that you're having with Maggie Centre users, and how concerned are they as we all start to venture out again about how life will be for them?
I think there are probably two extremes to people's reaction. I think, for a population of people who are obliged to shield for 12 weeks, people have been going stir crazy with what that obligation means. It's incredibly paralysing for people, and particularly for people who haven't had a garden space or an outside space to be able to utilise. It's been really physically and emotionally damaging for them, but they've been fastidious about the rules. A population of people affected by cancer are generally much more aware of cross-contamination issues than the general population. So a cancer population really understand the importance of these steps and why it's so essential, but they've also been exhausted by it. So that there's a desperation to get out of lockdown and to be able to step outside, but a real fear around it. And one of the real fears was also that the opening out of lockdown and possible opening out of shielding, certainly in England and Wales, coincided with the rest of the population stepping out as well. And it felt like too much of the potential for overlap with other individuals, too much cross-contamination risk. So most people are choosing to either safely and appropriately modify the rules for themselves, so choosing to go out early in the morning or late in the evening, to go to spaces where they know there's not going to be other people, and not to interact with too many other people because it just doesn't feel safe yet to be able to do so. So from our point of view, I think we're still really supporting people with the complex emotional struggle with that, but also the practical advice around what that might mean to them.
The advice is key. The communication around all of this is key. That's something we talked about last night on debate night, in a conversation around whether 2 meters was the right level for social distancing, or 1.5 meters or 1 meter. And the fact of the matter is, anything that becomes more confusing is difficult at this time, especially for the most vulnerable people using your service, who need clear information that they can feel safe to follow.
I think that's absolutely right, and there has been an issue with some of the clarity. So one of the clarities was, this is your shielding letter, please shield. So a large population of people in a very diverse range of circumstances in relation to cancer got the same message. And I think there was real sense in that, because it helped people understand how to minimize the risk for self. The difficulty was that some of those people actually were in a much safer set of circumstances than others. And what's had to happen over this period of time is for the individuals to check in with their own clinicians, or to check in with us, to think about how they appropriately and safely make that information bespoke to their own circumstances, rather than it being a blanket statement. Communication around public health issues is always challenging, and I think some of the key elements of stay at home were really well communicated. I think as we start to transition, it becomes much more nuanced and much more complex. But I trust all of the population that we're supporting to make sensible decisions for themselves. They are, as I said earlier on, they're to some extent hyper alert about these types of issues anyway, in terms of the risk of contamination. So that I trust that they will make good, well-advised decisions. It's a sensible adult population we're talking about, and I hope that they're able to get appropriate guidance from their personal clinicians to help them with those decisions, along with the support that we can offer.
Just a reminder, you can get your questions into us on the right-hand side of the screen. There should be easily available and open for you. If not, just click on the little icon with the question mark there, and you can send questions in that we'll try and clear up over the course of the next 45 minutes. Andrew, let's speak to somebody now who did receive one of those shielding letters. Lesley Stephen is a user of the Maggie's Centre in Edinburgh, her of the Clean Kitchen. Lesley, thanks so much for your time. For those who don't know you, who are on this call, tell us your story. How did you end up using Maggie's?
Well, I thought, a fit and healthy mother of 4 living in Edinburgh. I developed a dry cough that just wouldn't go away over a number of months, and eventually went to my GP about it, thinking I had, adult onset asthma or a chest infection or something like that. GP very quickly sent me for a chest X-ray and then an urgent CT scan, and this all happened within a number of days. And I was absolutely horrified, devastated to find out that I had breast cancer that had already spread extensively to my lungs and to my liver, and a week later found out it was in my bones as well. That this was incurable, treatable, but not curable. And immediately was just plunged into a very dark space, absolutely grief-stricken. Very fortunately, I'd heard of Maggie's. Not sure I had the confidence at that point to go in myself, but a good friend and a great supporter and fundraiser of Maggie's, Lisa, said to me, "You've got to go down, I'll take you down." And within a number of days, I arrived at the centre, and I'm sure Andy maybe remembers that day. I was in a terrible state, very, very, very ill, couldn't talk without coughing because of so much cancer in my lungs. And I honestly couldn't have got through the last 6 years, this was 6 years ago, without the support of Maggie's and Andy, and they've been a huge support to our family. So I was, as I say, devastated to get the news, and I used to joke that the cancer had spread faster than Usain Bolt on steroids. I felt like it was all through my body. I really didn't know how long I would live for. I was told the average life expectancy is about 2 years. And I started on a fairly brutal chemo regime, which did a really good job of reducing cancer. But then the following year, the cancer moved into my brain. And at that point, that was another very, very low point for me, because I didn't think that I would survive, but I did. I got treatment for that, whole brain radiotherapy. I then went on another chemo regime that didn't work for me, and followed that with another drug that was meant to be the best drug available for my type of breast cancer, which I had to self-fund because it wasn't available in Scotland, but was available in England. And that was another big battle I had on my hands. We ended up having to pay for it ourselves, and it didn't work. And at that point, things were looking pretty bleak for me. I had always, though, had a great interest in clinical trials, because a friend, this good friend, had been on a trial and done very, very well out of it. And I just thought that's my only hope of extending my life and having a better quality of life as well. And I'm very fortunate that my oncologist in Edinburgh was very research focused, very supportive. I spent a lot of time researching myself, going on to all these very technical, medical, unpatient friendly trial databases to try and I'd scroll through them. These were trials from all around the world, trying to find out, right, what is there near me, or in the UK, or even in Europe I was willing to travel to, that might help me. And I would send my oncologist links all the time. He was amazing. He would comment on them, come back to me, even phone me from his holiday once to explain why a particular trial wasn't the best one for me. So we carried on like that. And then when the treatment that I self-funded didn't work, basically I was told to get my affairs in order. Things were looking pretty bleak, and that was the back end of 2015. So we went away together as a family to New York for what I thought would be my last family holiday, and came back, and amazingly my oncologist had found the last place on a very early stage phase 1 clinical trial in Glasgow at the Beatson. So just a easy train journey through, and I grabbed that chance, nothing to lose and potentially a lot to gain. And within a fortnight had started on the trial. And I kept a diary at the time. And interestingly, I went back to it a couple of months ago and had a look. And I'd written about day 5 or day 6 on the trial that I felt like a different person. So previously, I couldn't climb the stairs at home because there was so much cancer in my lungs. I wouldn't say that I was sprinting up the stairs, but I could definitely tell that my breathing was significantly better. And I'm still on that clinical trial today. So it's been an absolutely astonishing lifeline for me.
Amazing. And talk to us about how Maggie supported you through that, because there's the hope that comes with a clinical trial, but the uncertainty as well. And how did the conversations that you had at Maggie's and the support from Maggie's help you through that?
Well, every time I went to see Andy, even in the bleakest moments, I always came away with a feeling of hope. He would always talk about, oh no, don't worry, there's plenty more options. And I had so many questions for him, and I was utterly, amazed that the support you get from Maggie's isn't just, it's definitely, emotional support, but also support on how to manage your consultant, the relationships with your medical team, the side effects and how to deal with those. And it was all encompassing. So I just don't think I don't think we could have survived. My husband also came down and saw Andy a number of times, and he works in Cumbernauld and has also visited the Maggie's in Lanarkshire as well for support. And I try to encourage the sort of now teenage boys to come down as well, because they wouldn't talk about my diagnosis. They didn't ask questions. They just were a bit head in the sand about it all. And I think to some extent they still are, even though they're much older now. But my daughter, who is now 11, but what age was she when I was diagnosed? 4 or 5. She had a lot of questions for me, which I found difficult to answer. And I probably about 18 months ago, maybe slightly longer, brought her down to see Andy, and we just had a very informal three-way conversation, and she asked him questions that she hadn't asked me. She felt she could ask him. One of the questions I always remember was, "Is Mommy going to die?" And I wouldn't have known how to answer that. I think Andy said something like, "Yes, she's going to die, but nobody knows when. The doctors don't know, she doesn't know." And I remember, Andy, you said, sorry, it's quite emotional.
It's fine.
And you said at the end of the conversation that she could come back any time if she had more questions, and you'd always tell her the truth. And in the car home, I said, how was it? Did you like Andy? And she said, "Oh, I really liked him." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because he'll always tell me the truth." So it was just a really interesting, very emotional moment for me. But she got a huge amount out of that conversation.
I love your description of managing your consultants there, Lesley, because they think they're in charge, but they're not really, are they?
Well, not really. Not with me as a patient.
I want to deal with most of the questions at the end, but they're coming in. Just click on the sidebar on the right-hand side if you have a question. But there's one that just seems really relevant to what you're talking about there. Someone's asking, how do we cope with living in fear? Now, I'm guessing that question is kind of, connected to coronavirus and the core of our conversation today. But you've lived through fear, I would imagine, with what you've been through. How do you rationalise it? How do you come out the other side of it?
I've had a long time to come to terms with the fact that I will die sooner than I would like. I've never felt angry about that. I've felt very sad, and I have felt fearful, and I've had conversations with Andy. I remember one where I'm scared about when the time comes that there will be no more treatment options for me, and that time might come soon because I'm kind of out of standard NHS treatments. And I wanted to have the conversation about how do I face that? How do I deal with that? And it's not easy. I think I just, in terms of the fear, I try and not think about it. I just park it in a little box in my head somewhere, and I'm not ready to completely open up that box yet. And I try and focus on the positive things in life. I try to focus on the family and the children that I've got. And I think, well, even if my life ends in 6 months, I've had a really, really good life. And I look at people, families, children around the world who are in a much, much worse state than me. So I'm thankful for what I've got.
So you're trying to keep yourself in that really positive headspace, and you have this enormous thing to cope with in your life. And then in crashes something that none of us saw coming, coronavirus. How has it impacted on you in terms of the way you're thinking about your cancer and the support that you need at the moment? Are you still getting it?
Yes, yeah. I've not felt I needed as much support in the last few years, because with this clinical trial, I've lived a pretty much normal quality of life, but the cancer is now, over the last year, it's started to grow again. And so I'm now facing some significant challenges in terms of my care going forward. I need to get part of my lung removed that's got tumours in it. And I've been told that there could be a delay of up to 3 months because of resources and operating theatres and so on getting diverted to COVID support. And the other challenge that I kind of face, and which is having quite an impact on me sort of mentally, is that it's likely I will have to come off this clinical trial that has given me 4.5 years of life I really didn't expect to have. So just that change in itself is really quite worrying for me. But I'm going to probably have to come off this trial at some point in the next 6 months to a year. And currently all clinical trial recruitment has stopped in the UK, pretty much all, because of COVID. And the future going forward, even when trials start to open up, there may not be as many trials open. I've got very, very few trial options as it is. And everything could take quite a while to restart. And that I find, I'm really quite anxious about that.
I'm guessing the postman has delivered a lot of medical related mail to you, Lesley, over the last 6 or 7 years. Tell me about receiving the shielding letter.
I was glad to get it. It took a while to come through. I'd heard of other patients receiving theirs, and I did wonder at one point, because even though I'm on a phase 1 trial, I have advanced cancer that can't be cured, I'm living very well. And so when it came through, I was kind of relieved, because it was an acknowledgement that I need to really look after myself. But then I also thought, oh my goodness, how I'm used to being very active, going out running, walking. I thought, how on earth am I going to manage staying indoors for 12 weeks? So what I did was I asked my oncologist here in Edinburgh and the one at the Beats, and asked them both, can I safely go outside and continue doing my exercises, my walking and so on? And they were great about it. They said, yeah, absolutely. If you can do that safely, social distancing, then they both agreed it was really important for me, for my mental well-being, and also my physical kind of fitness, which just makes me feel great when I go out and walk or run or whatever, just dispels all those black thoughts that you might have. Really important for me, and I'm sure has helped keep me alive for as long as I have. So they were very supportive of that. So to be honest, I'm not advocating other patients do this, but for me, I chose to bend the rules a little bit just for my own well-being.
And in terms of the information that you're getting at the moment about what's happening with coronavirus, I know a lot of people have kind of jumped into the news and watched the government briefings, and other people, it's just too much to kind of compute and apply to their own circumstances. How do you deal with it every day? Are you following closely events, or have you chosen, because of your situation, to step back a little bit and cocoon yourself?
No, I'm following events. I'm curious to see how opening up in Scotland is going to go. We watch what's happening down south. I know quite a number of English patients are, as Andy said earlier, are very anxious about stepping out of their front door at the same time as everybody else. And I know I feel a little bit anxious about that as well when we're allowed to do that. I mean, we've not had the go ahead yet in Scotland. So yeah, I'm quite involved, and I've been following a lot of the clinicians and the cancer charities to see what their sort of stand on all of this is. And what I do find as worrying as stepping outside and mixing with other people who may not be practicing social distancing quite the way I would want, what's worrying is how slowly it might be before cancer care resumes, and the backlog, the huge backlog, I think, of patients that there'll be, and that the future. I heard one clinician talk about the future of cancer research and trials and so on, which have been a lifeline for me, literally, talking about it in terms of it being an existential crisis for the future of cancer research. So COVID is having really significant consequences for cancer patients, I think, going forward.
That's interesting. We'll explore that with Andrew in just a minute. One final thing, just while we're with you just now, Lesley, I wanted to ask you, one of the reasons that I wanted to do this afternoon was because my neighbour, who I've lived next door for 20 years, Jenny was my next door neighbour. She died last year of breast cancer very quickly, and her first grandchild is due this weekend. Something that she's not been able to see, and I spoke to her husband this morning about the kind of emotions that he's going through with all of this. You, I guess, look forward to Christmas and every summer when it comes, and the sound of the birds in spring, and wonder if it will be the last one that you will have. How difficult is it with coronavirus here? Do you feel you're being cheated of time, special time that should be yours to enjoy life, to go out and live life to the full?
I don't feel cheated at the moment. I kind of think you can find a silver lining in everything. And actually what COVID has done is enabled me to spend more time with my family. Even if it is them, getting up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and frying eggs for their breakfast. But my husband, who I used to not see an awful lot of because he had to travel for work every day, he's been working from home. So I think it's actually brought us together as a family, strangely, because we've all been pretty much, cocooned indoors together. So I know I feel cheated by the cancer diagnosis, absolutely. I'm amazed and delighted that I have seen some of the milestones I didn't think I would see because I've been living with it for 6 years. But I want more. 6 years of life isn't enough. I want 10, 20 years. I want to see my children, leave school, get careers, maybe get married, get a partner, grandchildren. And what I find most sad is that I'm not going to see that, a lot of that.
Lesley, you're an amazing woman. I've just realised we know the same Lisa, actually, and she's been on an incredible journey with all of this as well, and keeps on going. And you're an inspirational person, and that's a very overused phrase. But thanks for your time so far. We'll come back to you a little bit later. Your questions for Andrew or for Lesley, get them in just now on the right hand side of the screen. We'll come to them in just a couple of minutes time. Andrew, I just wanted to pick up that point that Lesley was making about research and about this existential crisis facing cancer care. We'll talk about funding in just a second, but all eyes on research are on a vaccine for coronavirus at the moment. How concerned are you about the implications that has for cancer?
Yeah, I'm hugely concerned. Coronavirus is a massively important subject, and it's obviously the subject on everybody's mind currently. But cancer is much more of an impactful disease than coronavirus is in terms of the amount of people who will die of a cancer diagnosis or be affected by a cancer diagnosis. And there is a real need to think about re-establishing all of the cancer-related screening, the cancer-related investment and care and treatment, as Lesley said a moment ago, for a very practical reason, partly because if there are further delays on it, it creates a major issue for the NHS in the next 3, 6, 9 months. But fundamentally, for the well-being of human beings. These are people who have health concerns and health issues that deserve the appropriate care and the appropriate attention. And I think within the clinical trial world, I know from speaking to my colleagues this morning in clinical trials in the Western General, they are thirsty to restart because they see the amount of people who are in Lesley's similar circumstances. They are working extremely hard to make sure that clinical trials can be safe, can be appropriate, but also importantly can be restarted. And the intention is for that to restart as soon as possible for the established studies. Part of the challenge is, where does the funding come for the new studies, the novel drugs, the drug developments that Lesley's alluding to, that are so fundamentally important for the management of a very complicated series of diseases. Cancer is one name for about 200 different diseases, and it's essential that that research continues at a pace. I think some of it is about how we respond as a society. We do need to find a way of contextualizing coronavirus, SARS, other elements of pandemic that we have to think about how we behave around, because our globe functions differently, therefore the risk of pandemic is greater. But at the same time, we have other risks, and cancer is a fundamental existential shift for many, many people on a daily basis. We standardly see around about 120 people a day in the Edinburgh Centre, and as Maggie's last year, we saw over 250,000 visits to the centres for people who are wrestling with really challenging issues to do with their cancer diagnosis. So there has to be a parity, and there has to be a rebalancing of that focus on supporting people with cancer, not just the emotional and practical support that we offer, but absolutely the tangible care and treatment that people like Lesley are receiving.
We know, Andrew, that charities are concerned about donations. The economy is facing some really tough times. very gloomy predictions about where unemployment is going to go in this country. Money will be tight, and inevitably when that happens, we saw it back in 2008, it's a tough time for charities as well. You've had incredible support down the years from the general population, from the people of Scotland, the people of Edinburgh, and also, of course, from your relationship with the People's Postcode Lottery. How concerned are you about Maggie's funding in the months and the years ahead?
Sadly, I'm really concerned, not because I doubt the commitment of the community around us, but because of all the factors you've just described. People have lost their jobs, people are uncertain about their financial futures, their desire is to commit to giving to the NHS because of some of the publicity that's come around the NHS's need. And we appropriately have stepped back from a fundraising ask as a result of that. But we, for the Edinburgh Centre, predict significant shortfalls for this year, which will make a big impact on what we're able to do. The type of support that we're able to provide potentially will be limited. We are hugely supported by players of the People's Postcode Lottery because it feels like solid, steady income for us. As a small charity, we're dependent on steady income. The community around us has been magnificently supportive, and at some point we hope that they're able to return to that. But it's going to be a real challenge for us, and we as a clinical team will work as hard as we possibly can to make sure that we commit to supporting people like Lesley because of the reasons that she described so eloquently earlier on. Those needs are essential, and it's essential for us to continue to do that. So we will do it come hell or high water, but it is going to be a real challenge, and we are sadly dependent on the community around us for offering that financial support.
And I guess another difficulty, Andrew, and I've been, lucky enough to be involved in a couple of them, is you have this amazing network of fundraising events at Maggie's that you've built up over the years that people look forward to, and they're very successful at raising money, but they're also very kind of sociable events. And I guess you need to look again at how you stage those and what of those you're able to continue to do in this new socially distanced coronavirus age.
That's exactly right. So we had a schedule of fundraising events that the community had organised for us and events that we had organised that were scheduled for the rest of this year, which sadly at the moment look like they pretty much all will have to be cancelled or postponed. What we've done so effectively within the programme team is respond and shift everything to an online platform. And we've already seen brilliant examples of people being really creative with their fundraising for us in a virtual way. And we hope that we can support people to do more of that type of virtual fundraising for us, because we are a key component of the Edinburgh community and the communities around each of the Maggie centres in each of the cities in the UK. We're owned by the Edinburgh population and the wider population around it. This is their centre. It's not my centre, it's their centre. And our desire is that people consider what they've experienced from us in the past and what they hope for us to be able to do for other people in the future. And we're grateful for the support we continue to receive, but we're dependent on the support we will receive.
Okay, let's move on to some questions for you both. Keep them coming in, by the way. It's just the right-hand side of the screen you need to go to. It should be pretty self-explanatory for you there. Just look for the little question mark icon at the top if you're having difficulty, but they are already coming in thick and fast. So maybe if we start with this one, how can people gain their confidence back about going out into the world and coming back to Maggie's after so long shielding? We touched on this a little bit earlier, Andrew, but we've all felt very safe and comfortable in our homes for the last, nearly 3 months now. How do we get that confidence back to step outside and to engage with other people at this time?
So I think, first of all, you have to practice gaining that confidence, because it's been a long time being in lockdown and people appropriately have felt safe in that. It does feel uncomfortable, the thought of putting your head out the front door and potentially encountering other people. At the moment, one of the safest things you could do is to come to Maggie's, because it's a protected space with healthcare professionals that are aware of that. So phone us, we can make an appointment and we can make sure it's at a time that the centre isn't busy and that you've got the opportunity to come and speak to us. It's a good way of practicing being out. A number of people have said to us just how brilliantly supportive the NHS have been in making modifications to make it feel safe in going to hospital appointments, and that is an important practice point as well. but there are still alarm bells. There's still, how do I get to the hospital? How do I use public transport? Is it safe to go into a shop? And there are very real issues for people, but their circumstances will be different. My encouragement would be to speak to us on a one-to-one basis about that. Just like Lesley said earlier on, she's appropriately bent the rules according to her own circumstances, and she's done that safely and appropriately, which has enhanced her physical and emotional well-being. So there are ways of being able to do it safely. I think the concern at the moment that most people I'm speaking to have is not necessarily their behaviour, because they're fully aware of how to behave safely, it's the behaviour of others around them. And at the moment, the general population have gone into kind of demob happy, we've got some freedom and we're going out. I think that needs to settle down before people feel safe in being able to be more in the general community. But also thinking about how you are with your family. The risk a number of people say is, I'm desperate to see my family, but I know that if I see my grandchildren, my urge to run towards them or their urge to run towards me will be too great, and the emotional pressure of that is unbearable, so I want to avoid it. So there's practical challenge, but also emotional challenge. My encouragement would be to speak to any one of us about that and to think about how you make preparation for it to feel safe, to put the practical steps around it to feel safe, and then to allow it to happen.
It's a really good point you make, though. It can just be small steps to begin with, can't it? You know, it can be just a walk around the block that only takes 10 minutes. That's when the time is right, and you know the permission is there. Lesley, here's a question for you here. Listening to Lesley was so inspirational. I wondered if you had any advice on talking to my children about my cancer, especially as we're all at home more, so the effects are more visible to them. Gosh, so much wrapped up in that, but you've been through the experience with your daughter and your sons. What can you say?
I would take advice from Maggie's actually about that, and but I just try to, when I have spoken to them, I try and keep it fairly matter of fact. It's just the way I deal with it. I don't want them, and I'm sure whoever asked the question is the same, I don't want them worrying about me until we're at the stage where, you know, things are pretty serious for me, and we're not at that stage yet. And I always hang on to hope there'll be something else, and I just try to keep it fairly matter of fact and tell them when I've been to get treatment, and I might be a little bit tired that night, and my daughter will ask questions, the boys less so. They just go, okay, fine, and that, I find that difficult. I wish they could open up a wee bit more. So I've not cracked that one by any means, but just keep the lines of communication open, and maybe think about a trip to Maggie's at some point as a family.
We often talk about these sideways conversations, don't we? The hardest thing to do is actually sit across the kitchen table and try and have a conversation about something like this, but it's the opportunities that you have when, well, there we go, you know, when you're out for a walk or something that is more difficult for many people to do at the moment. It's those moments, more relaxed moments as a family, when you can take a chance to have a conversation. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's very difficult to, if you have a kind of, if you stage it and you're all sitting there together, that immediately makes it a much, you know, a really, really big significant issue that the children, they may not visibly show much emotion, but I'm sure they'll be feeling it inside. So yeah, I would keep it fairly low key, and yeah, as you say, absolutely, if you're out in the car together, sitting side by side, or out for a walk, those are ideal opportunities to discuss these things. Thanks for that question, Andrew, and the team at Maggie's. It's a path that they've been down many times, so they'll be able to help you, as Lesley says. Andrew, here's one for you. Maggie's has been my safe place since I was diagnosed with cancer, and has been there for me throughout my cancer journey. Although I continue to be supported while shielding via Zoom and WhatsApp and telephone, my concerns are for newly diagnosed people who've been unable to walk physically through the door of Maggie's and sit down around the kitchen table and feel that safety and friendship at a very hard time in their lives. How do you see this safely returning? What is the strategy for this? That's a very good point. I mean, Lesley told us about that first time of going to Maggie's, and how she had to kind of steel herself for the experience. And physically is often the easiest way for people to make the relationships before going on to Zoom or WhatsApp or whatever. when is that going to be possible?
So sadly, there have been many people who we've had to support virtually. They've had no experience of what it feels like to walk through the door, to sit at the kitchen table and to be held by the physical space, but they have been held by us by phone, etc. Our keenness is hopefully in the next couple of weeks to be able to provide more of that in-centre experience. We've already started seeing people by appointment, as I said earlier on. What is going to be very different in the centre is the sense of the buzz of energy around the centre is different. It's got a buzz at the moment because we've got NHS staff in it, but when they move away, it will feel different. And one of the brilliant things about Maggie's is not just the exceptional clinical support and professional advice you get, it's also being around other people in similar circumstances, and that is going to be different. So we're working hard at thinking about how we might best fulfill that for people, but certainly anybody that has been newly diagnosed over the last 3 months or is being diagnosed in the next few weeks will definitely be able to come and see us in the centre.
Good. Okay. Here's not so much a question, just a point from Colin, who's watching this. Hi, Colin. I'm currently in the shielded category because I have leukemia. I'm very fortunate in that I'm fit and well. If my blood condition started misbehaving, I have absolute confidence in my clinicians to give me the appropriate treatment to bring things under control. However, with COVID-19, I have no confidence in how my immune system would react. It's one of the most confusing things for people in my situation, the uncertainty, the not knowing, because it's a new virus and so many things about this are unknown. Maggie's has been great for me in its continuing support throughout this pandemic. We are learning more about it, Andrew, as every day, as every week passes at the moment, and hopefully in time and quite quickly we might have some more information about how that impacts on immune systems and certain conditions, and that may make it easier for some people not to be shielded and to be unlocked.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Thanks, Colin. Thank you so much for your question and for tuning in. One of the really important pieces of research that's come out this week is a meta-analysis that's been done between Oxford and Birmingham universities looking at COVID-19 in a cancer population. One of the reassuring things that's come out of that is that the assumptions that were made at the very start of coronavirus were that anybody who is immunocompromised because of a cancer diagnosis and on treatment would have a much greater risk of having severe COVID-19 symptoms. Thankfully, that evidence is suggesting that that is not the case, and in particular solid tumour types like breast cancer and colon cancer, there have been lower incidences of death associated with COVID-19 than would have been expected, and most of the risk factors wrap around hypertension, diabetes, being overweight and some other health factors. What's challenging about Colin's question, as he appropriately understands, is he has an underlying hematological disorder, and there is less still known about an underlying hematological disorder. So there probably, sadly, is going to be more pressure on people with altered immunological systems because of their disease rather than because of their treatment to remain isolated or to continue to be much more vigilant about their health behaviour, which is a really challenging circumstance. One of your questions to Lesley earlier on was, of course, the impact of coronavirus and the limitations it brings is eating away at time, and that is a real challenge for people for whom they're not sure about how long they may have to be able to live. My hope is that each individual's clinician will become more aware within their specific disease type to give more guidance about some of the risks associated and how to minimise and mitigate those risks. But there is more encouraging news coming out for people who are in treatment to hopefully be less alarmed. And because we know that people are so adept and able to alter their behaviour and mitigate their risks in a cancer circumstance, we have seen a lower incidence in that population than the standard population because they're so naturally shielding, they're so naturally health aware and physically distancing appropriately.
We've got quite a few questions about fundraising in reaction to the conversation we were having about that. Lesley, what have you done as part of the fundraising community at Maggie's? What have you taken part in yourself?
I've been on one of the culture crawls, which was great, actually. I really enjoyed that. Oh gosh, I can't think of it.
You did a catwalk for us?
Oh yes, oh gosh, that was a long time ago. Yeah, a couple of those. So got involved in some of the events that the Lisa that we've mentioned runs. So I've been a core part of helping her with that. And those events have raised a huge amount of money for Maggie's, but as we've already said, sadly, they involve you know, not being 2 meters apart. So that's all stopped. So yeah, going forward, it is a very worrying fundraising situation.
So this is the challenge. Andrew, 2 questions in here, both in the same theme. I mean, right now, how can people support Maggie's with fundraising at this time? What can they do in the limited circumstances we all have to contribute?
So that there are a range of ways. One of the things that happened earlier this year was the 2.6 challenge, which was a huge success for Maggie's. Many people who had committed to do some kind of fundraising that had to then change, they shifted it to the 2.6 challenge, which was the replacement for the London Marathon. And people have taken that type of theme forward and looked at different ways of being able to host the kitchen table day that they were going to do for Maggie's, and actually to make it a virtual experience. There's a gorgeous young girl who lives in East Lothian who was going to bake cakes and have cake sales. What she's done is bake cakes and deliver them, and she's raised an enormous amount of money for us in that realm. As an organisation, what helps us feel secure are people who are regular givers, people who commit to give on a regular basis, and without obliging anybody to do it. That is one of the most securing ways for us to feel safe, which is partly how players of People's Postcode Lottery support us. But then also, importantly, Lesley Stephen, who we've mentioned already, has taken it upon herself to consider what she might be able to do as a next step of fundraising to help us open the door to many other people affected by a cancer diagnosis. And over the next few weeks, we will look at how we might articulate that for people to be able to take part in. However people can support us, we would love them to be able to do so. We have a range of amazing volunteers who help us in a very practical way. And for some people, their support needs to be practical because they've not got the financial means to support us. And that's absolutely appropriate. And those are beautiful ways of supporting us. For those of you who do have the financial means to support us, be in touch with myself or Mark Cooper, who's my fundraising colleague in the centre, and we can guide you to think about how you might best and most creatively support us at this time.
A question here about isolation. Andrew, I'm feeling quite lonely in isolation, but don't have anything specifically I need to speak to Maggie's about. I just miss being able to drop into the centre for a cup of tea, that kind of physical thing that we were talking about. Are there any resources available for me at the moment in the community that could support me in that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we are doing within the centre that I'd really love the person to be able to take part in is our virtual kitchen table experience that we do at the moment on a weekly basis, but we're looking to see whether we could do that more frequently. So if you are interested in joining us at a virtual kitchen table to meet 20 other people to have a conversation, please email us. And if you email us at edinburgh@maggies.org, we can give you the link. And if Edinburgh isn't your local centre, email me anyway, and I'll put you in touch with your local centre. And I appreciate that the person says that they may not have any pressing issues or pressing concerns, but those underlying concerns, that sense of being unsettled by isolation, disturbed by isolation, feeling low or flat by isolation, are just as present and just as important. So please phone us. That's exactly why we're here as a team, to be able to give a sense of connection and to help you understand how you continue to sustain yourself through your cancer experience.
Good. My legendary technical incompetence has left me with 9% of battery with 7 minutes to go. So this is getting exciting. I'm going to make it all the way to 3 o'clock. Yeah, I'm sure we will. I'll take it nice and slowly. Maggies.org, of course, is the place to go for all information on this. Just one more question around services, Andrew. With such a backlog of cancer diagnosis and treatment building up, what challenges lie ahead for Maggie's to meet demands for support when the doors are physically reopened again the way they used to be? Will there be a big backlog of work for you to deal with, for you to work your way through?
I honestly don't think there's a backlog, because the people who have been being diagnosed in the midst of coronavirus have been in touch with us. What I think is the backlog for the NHS in terms of the diagnostic process. So there may be an influx and a higher incidence over the next 6 to 9 months, which we definitely need to be prepared for, and we absolutely want to be available to support those people. Those people will have extra concerns and extra questions, and there's two elements to that. Partly for people who feel that they've been picked up late, or that they've held on to their symptoms and they've presented late, that will come with a psychological consequence. But also the population for whom they've been in a situation where either they or their family member have had deferred treatment or delayed treatment that has had a consequence on their future health and well-being, and for the population, sadly, who may have died in the midst of this period. Our desire to reach out to that population and to be a resource for that population to look at the psychological consequences that are complex anyway, but will be exacerbated because of the issues to do with lockdown and the pandemic. My encouragement to everybody would be to reach out to us. We will make sure that we provide the resource that's what you need.
We feel like pioneers as a group this afternoon, don't we? This is the first time that Maggie's has done an event like this, and apart from me forgetting to bring my charger through, it's worked remarkably well so far. So final question, are there any plans to arrange socially distant get-togethers at Maggie centres anytime soon for people who miss the social aspect of Maggie's? Andrew?
Yes, we will. So our first step is going to be organising appointments for individuals or for couples or for families. Those are the safe, immediate steps that we can easily accommodate because of the space that we have in the centre. What we want to then do is think about small group activity. So the room that I'm sitting in at the moment could easily accommodate 8 people at 2 metre distancing. And if there is a language about the distancing changing, that would allow us to accommodate more people. So our intention absolutely is to bring people back to the centre. One of the brilliant things that Maggie knew was essential for her was to meet other people in similar circumstances, to try and neutralise the intensity of what this experience meant for her, as well as speaking to healthcare professionals. And it's essential that as Maggie's, we offer that again, but it's more important that we offer it safely and wisely, respecting people's concerns and fears.
All the information, as always, is at maggies.org, and you can email edinburgh@maggies.org for more information on those virtual kitchen table sessions that we were talking about earlier. That's it. Our hour is up here this afternoon. Thank you so much to you, Lesley, for being so honest about your experience and for opening up. It touched us all this afternoon. We wish you all the best on your journey, and we will all be thinking about you in the months ahead. Keep up with the running, and you keep those boys under control in that kitchen.
I will. Thank you, Stephen.
And if they're available to come round and cook breakfast once we all unlock fully, I'll be booking them in for sure. And Andrew, thank you so much for your time, for your leadership, and for organising this session, and for the support that you offer day in, day out to people living with cancer in Edinburgh. Maggies.org is the place to go to for more information and further links on everything that you've heard this afternoon. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. Stay safe and stay well.